That is absolutely amazing, folks, to see you this Monday morning, wherever you're coming from in the world. I today work. I'm working from Brazil, Sao Paulo, in my home office. Isn't it beautiful, folks, that the world became the world got so much more freedom. Now we can work from anywhere in the world and connect with a lot more people, ideas, talent, and just make connections that were never possible before. Isn't that amazing? But today, as you guessed from the name of the the live stream that I'm making, is about coffee and how to use coffee as a tool to increase your focus, to increase your productivity. And I need to, I think, adjust my microphone. Okay. To get the benefits, again, to increase your focus, to increase your energy, to increase your productivity without a crushing heart after and feeling like you need another coffee later in the morning or in the afternoon and screwing up your sleep with that and your productivity for the next day, right? It's how to avoid all these crashes. And then two, a lot of people ask me, like, Angela, what's the deal with that? That sometimes I get my coffee and I feel totally fine. I feel focused, alert, and productive, right? In like my sweet spot. And sometimes I just have these jitters, like I seem to be hyperactive, not able to accomplish a lot of things, just a lot of energy that I cannot put to use, right? Like, how can I how can I be more in that sweet spot? Like, how can I figure it out? So I'm gonna answer both of those concerns and questions. So number one, well, yeah, I think I want to start with what caffeine does in our system. It does a few things. Number one, it does help to create and more dopamine receptors to make our dopamine system more well functioning in our brain, right? And dopamine is that molecule that is needed to create the state of focus, of drive, of energy, motivation for action, right? So caffeine does work on our dopamine system in our brain. Another thing that caffeine does, it actually increases adrenaline in our system. So our system, our brain, our adrenal glands are hyped up a little bit to produce a little bit more of that adrenaline that we do need to stay alert and focused and functioning well, but we need it in appropriate amounts. And so that jitterness actually that we're going to also go back to is the result of too much of that adrenaline starting to be produced and getting into your bloodstream, and that's why you're like ready for action, not for sitting down exactly and working on your computer. Again, you need some of that adrenaline, but not too much. And I'm going to share with you why exactly sometimes you have too much with coffee and sometimes not enough, or sometimes you're in that sweet spot. I'm going to give you the tool to experiment with to figure out your sweet spot of caffeine. So let's address, and the third thing I forgot that caffeine does is in our brain, we have this molecule adenosine that accumulates throughout the day, creating this state of sleep pressure, and that's what makes us feel sleepy. During the night, it gets cleared away from our brain, and that's why in the morning we feel fresh, alert, not sleepy. Although in the morning, some amount of that molecule is still hanging around in the brain, and that's why in the morning you might feel sleepy a little bit, a little bit groggy, not that much awake. And that's because some, again, amount of that adenosine is still in our system, still in our brain, still on those receptors that they usually reside. And then as we start waking up, our body, our brain start to clearing away that adenosine. Now, caffeine, the molecule of caffeine, is very similar to that of adenosine, and it binds to the same things in the brain, to the same receptors. And when it does, adenosine cannot park there. It's kind of can only like float in our brain without doing what it usually does, making us sleepy, creating sleep pressure. And so adenosine or caffeine blocks the ability of adenosine to work. And that's why we feel sharp and not sleepy. But that adenosine doesn't go anywhere, And so when the caffeine is out of our system, out of those receptors, adenosine can bind again to those receptors in our brain and can create the sleepiness, the sleep pressure. And so about this third job of caffeine. Now, when you wake up and you drink your first cup of coffee right away, where some of that adenosine is still in your system and it needs to be taken out, to be cleared out, right, as soon as possible. One of the fastest way to clear it away and get yourself alert and awake without caffeine is actually exercise. So 5 minutes of high intensity exercise, and a lot of that adenosine going to go out of your system really, really fast. But then if you drink caffeine while that adenosine is still in your system, if you drink your caffeine right first thing in the morning or in the next, like, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, what happens is it doesn't allow adenosine to be cleared away the right way. And so some of that adenosine is still hanging around in your brain. You drink your coffee, caffeine stays there. And then when the caffeine is out of your system, that adenosine can rush back and try to do its job while it can. And that's why you will experience crash in the mid-morning. So to avoid that, you need to delay your caffeine for what Andrew Huberman recommends, 90 to 120 minutes. And then some people ask me, what do I do? I don't feel awake without it. Well, then you have to rewire your brain. And for a few days, it's going to be uncomfortable. But what I personally do and recommend to all of my clients, again, number one, get that exercise if it's still dark outside and if you are an early bird. And number two, what helps that adenosine to be cleared faster is go and do light exposure. You need to do it anyhow. So basically go out, outside and view the sunlight as early as possible to your waking time. Go for a walk, start with a movement. It creates the right kind of brain chemistry. It boosts your dopamine, your norepinephrine, your adrenaline, your serotonin. All of this brain chemistry starts to creating in your brain, and that's how you start feeling alert and awake. So when I wake up, I do some exercise, I get outside as soon as the sun is out, I expose myself to as much bright light as possible, but it is especially important to get it outside. Sunlight is not the same as artificial light, right, folks? So you get yourself going without caffeine, and then once you wait for 90 to 120 minutes, you get your caffeine, and it will have the right kind of effect and will not produce the crash. Like, I never experienced crash from my coffee, just never, ever. And hey, Tanvir, great to see you. So if you have any questions about caffeine, please do post them. And the second question that I get a lot of is like, okay, what about the jitters? Why I get them sometimes, not the other times? And the answer to that is the amount of caffeine matters. For most people, that's why you get sometimes sweet spot of your focus and productivity, and sometimes you get the jitters. So how do you get the sweet spot, not the jitters? Here, it matters for you to not overdo your caffeine. Different caffeine drinks that can be, coffee and tea, energy drinks, different coffee drinks, different coffee shops will have different amount of caffeine in their drinks. One of the most caffeinated cafes where you get your coffee fix is Starbucks. Their drinks have the most caffeine compared to a lot of other coffee shops. So what it means for you is that if you get the jitters, then you need to either get smaller amount of that same coffee drink, like just cut it in half, right? The second way is to change your coffee shop or change the brewing method, right? Usually darker roasts, no, actually blonde roast would have the most amount of caffeine released, right? Darker roast actually have less, I believe. Um, let me see. So I'm going to open Starbucks website, and it says blonde roast 425 milligrams of caffeine. When it comes to dark roast, it is 300 340. So yeah, blonde roast actually would have more caffeine, almost by like 100 milligrams of caffeine per that drink. And that, folks, matters when it comes to, again, creating this sweet spot of focus and productivity, not the jitters. So first of all, venti is too much for almost any human being. It's, close to 400 milligrams that studies and research show is actually, for most people, means a lot of anxiety. It's just too much in one drink. What is recommended is about 400 milligram of caffeine per day, not in one venti drink, right? So back to jitters, why you have them, caffeine amount in most cases, and how you can make it smaller. Either have half of that drink, caffeine, drink with caffeine, coffee usually, or diluted. So literally you get the same, diluted, I mean, get the same drink, pour out half, and if you need more volume, just add water, or just get a smaller drink, and then you'll find the sweet spot for you for caffeine. So the basic idea here, to prevent jitters, diminish the amount of your caffeine by either cutting in half your drink, or what I usually do when I brew my coffee at home is I do half decaf and half caffeinated coffee. So basically a couple of spoons of decaf coffee, a couple of spoons of caffeinated coffee, and that cuts my caffeine amount basically in half for the same volume of coffee and the same like flavor, taste experience, right? So jitters, the amount of caffeine. So if you experience jitters, you need less. So dilute your coffee or get perhaps some decaf and some caffeinated coffee. And caffeine in intolerable amounts, in normal amounts, up to 400 milligrams, that is what's recommended. 2-3 cups of coffee, earlier in the day seems to be okay for most people. And if you avoid sugar, if you don't put a bunch of, different additives, making it into dessert, then coffee seems to be correlated with more good health outcomes than any negative health outcomes. So coffee seems to be actually good for you as long as you know how to drink it, the time, so it doesn't interrupt your sleep cycle, and the amount. Again, usually a average brewed coffee would have up to 100 130 milligrams of caffeine. For Starbucks, that's probably more around 150 180. And so you need to not drink more than 400 milligrams per day. That basically means maybe 2, maybe 3 cups of coffee, depending on the, again, caffeine, depending on the place, on the drink. So to conclude this episode, folks, to make it short, number one, to prevent the crash, delay your caffeine 90 to 120 minutes after your waking time. Do exercise, do light exposure, listen to music, dance, make your system running with movement, with light exposure, perhaps with cold shower, hyperventilation. Also helps a lot. Do that, then drink your caffeine in normal amounts, and to get into that sweet spot of focus and productivity, to stop experiencing jitters, you gotta cut down the amount of that caffeine. Again, maybe half decaf, half caffeine. And that's it, folks. Thank you for joining this live about caffeine. And I want to remind you that I'm a nutritionist. I'm also brain productivity high performance coach who specializes a lot in nutrition. So if you'd like to dial in your brain nutrition to be very productive, very focused, very confident, in calm, peaceful, productive state of mind, and that you kind of haven't figured that piece out of your performance and your productivity and your health, then there is a link underneath this video. So use it, schedule our free brain nutrition session, and you'll do much better. because expert advice, folks, matters. It's going to cost you a lot of time waste, a lot of energy waste, and will increase your productivity by a lot. So schedule that session if you want to optimize your brain nutrition. And I'll see you very soon on another live episode.